What is up, YouTube? How we doing? Welcome to my second Q&A session. And as you can see, I upgraded the setup a little bit. I finally hit the bullet and got a camera as well as some other accessories. So maybe I'm an actual influencer now. I've been using my iPhone like a noob for the last 2 years, I guess. We'll get right into it. Make sure you like and subscribe before I forget. And if you want to sign up for coaching, you can do so with the link in my bio or head to my Instagram and use that link in bio. So, Q&A, let me pull up the story from the other day. I don't actually know how to do this efficiently. Got it. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to put 20 minutes on the clock and I'm going to cut it off there. Hopefully, I get to all of them. All right, first question. If I have a 35-inch standing vertical, only 275, would getting front squat to 315 immediately transfer? Yes. If you get your front squat up to, if you increase your front squat by, what is that, 25 plus 15, 40 pounds, you're very likely to see probably a 2-ish increase in your standing vertical. One note though is make sure that you actually practice your CMJs. It is a skill in itself. So if you want to maximize transfer, yes, get your squat up, but also practice your CMJs. When do you incorporate plyos into a power/elasticity cycle? Plyos are in pretty much all of our elasticity cycles. We usually pair them with eccentric strength training because we're trying to train that eccentric part of the curve. We will add some plyos in our power cycles, like triple broad jumps or standing triple jumps or standing 10 pounds. As far as up jumps go, those are pretty much exclusively in our elasticity cycles. Best top 3 exercises, best top 3 plyos for vertical jump. Depends if it's 1 or 2 foot. For 2 foot, I really like sprint accelerations if you want to count that as a plyo. Usually guys who are really good at accelerating are also really good 2 foot jumpers. I love depth jumps. Obviously, 2 foot approach jumps, like 2 foot max approach jumps, are the best plyo you can do to jump higher off of 2 feet. And I also like single hops for 1 and 2 feet, and max and top speed sprinting and pogo hops are great for 1 foot. And as well as I would also put in some step up jump variations are great for 1 foot. Would training distal muscles make more sense to train primarily with high velocity? That's kind of the philosophy that Bosch subscribes to. He argues that you can't overload the calves in the weight room because they're soleus is experiencing 8 times body weight in running, and I don't know what the gastroc is, like 5 or 6. But the caveat to that is if you want to increase your tendon stiffness, which is going to be a huge limiter to your rate of force development and your reactive strength, you need to train the distal muscles solely basically for tendon stiffness. I'm not going to try and argue any neurological aspects of it, but you do need to train it for tendon stiffness. Could you explain the concept of bleeding when it comes to periodization? Examples too, please. So when we talk about bleeding, we mean just sprinkling in things that athletes need based on the feedback they give us or for assessing them in person, which we rarely do, but John has like force plates and he'll do some various assessments. And whenever I see athletes in person, I'll do some assessments. But for Zoe, for example, if we have an athlete who obviously needs to get stronger, but their biggest deficit is in reactive strength. Say we do a speed assessment. So we look at their 40-yard dash, and we can see that they're a good accelerator. They're hitting the metrics they need, the times they need from like 0 to 10, maybe 0 to 15, but they kind of start to drop off as they transition to a little bit more max velocity. Like they're flying 10-yard after a 30-yard build-up is abysmal and is not what we need for their goal times. So that example would be, okay, well, they need more max velocity sprinting. So maybe instead of doing 2 ACL days and 1 max velocity, we do 1 ACL and 2 max velocity. And then they probably have a deficit in reactive strength just in general. So that's when we'll implement some bounds, some single hops, some things to overload that lower leg at very low volumes. These are not becoming the sole focus of training. We're talking 2 sets of 10 to 15 meter bounds or 20 meter bounds or like 2x8 single leg hops at like a medium to high intensity. And you do that 2 or 3 days a week, you add that into their warm up, and all of a sudden they start to see their reactive strength climb up because they're also doing all the other things they need, like increasing their strength and power in the weight room, their cross sectional area. They're getting their sprint reps in, which is the most important thing. So when we talk about bleeding stuff in, it just means we're sprinkling some stuff in at low volumes that aren't going to induce a ton of fatigue. It's going to keep you healthy, and it's going to, more importantly, drive performance. We're doing things that drive the needle. RPE/RIR programming instead of percentage loading for jump training, pros and cons. So we use RPE and RIR. I don't really like RPE, to be honest, because it's like, well, technically you should be doing RPE 10 for everything because you want to be going max in 10. So I prefer to use RIR. We do that for the accessories where you're not really going to test a 1 rep max. People don't really know their RDL max or their calf raise max. So that's when we'll be like, oh, just do a 2 or 3 RIR or a 7 RPE. I like using percentages, or at least giving athletes a range to work in, because we know what percent you're going to fail at. We know 85% of your 1 rep max in a back squat can only be done for 5, maybe 6 reps. So if I prescribe you 85% for 5, I know that you're going to be close to failure or 1 reps in reserve. And yes, your 1RM will vary day to day based on various factors. It can vary 18% or something like that. Or maybe you haven't tested your max for a while and you're a lot stronger, so you're actually underdosing yourself. So that's where it comes with, that's where the skill comes into play with, we said 85%, but if it's 85% for 5 reps, you know that that's supposed to be a very high RPE or a very low RIR. So if you do a set of 85 at 85%, that feels like a 3 RIR. I probably need to add more weight for my top set, and I probably need to adjust my 1 rep max accordingly. Cleans are a lot tougher to use RIR or an RPE with. You pretty much have to go with percentages. And again, you can use a range. Instead of 85%, it's okay, we're going to go 82.5% to 87.5% or 83 to 88. And you can just work within that range. You're still going to get the stimulus either way as long as you're pushing with high intent. And then that way you can still get clean reps and reps with high intent. Any advice for high school aspiring coaches who want to start their own business? I would say if you're in high school and you want to start your own business, I would actually advise against trying to start your own training business when you're in college. I am a big advocate for finding a mentor and working under somebody. You're never going to know what you need to know to be an effective coach when you're 19. You might think you do, but I can promise you I've changed a lot of things. I thought I knew a lot when I was 19 and 20 years old, but I realize now I knew pretty much nothing. So I would advise you, instead of trying to start your own business, I would seek out a coach. I would work under him, things like internships, and learn from somebody first. Get your formal education if you are in college. Get at least through that first, probably even seek higher education. But get experience first and then start your own business one step at a time. You can start your own business, but if you're not an effective coach, you're not going to get clients. So I would advise to get a mentor first and then start your own business. Do all NBA players have some tendon/PFP issues? How can one play so much without overloading? A lot of NBA players have tendon issues. I know John Morant talks about it. Anthony Edwards talks about it. They don't want to dunk in games because their tendon hurts. You have to realize that NBA players have access to a lot of phenomenal resources. Their loads are meticulously tracked with things like a catapult, which is essentially shows you how many miles you go in a practice. And I think some systems can even tell you how much your right leg got versus your left leg. And they monitor a ton of different variables, so they're really good at knowing how much load an athlete can handle and how much load they need to handle for a game and preparing athletes for that. NBA strength coaches have a ton of data with, hey, this guy's going to get 25 high-speed decels in a game, so we need to build that capacity in the offseason. Or they know exactly where an athlete's deficits are based off of their force plate data. So, and P3 is a great example of that. They have a ton of data, so they know exactly where an athlete is potentially susceptible, not only have decrements in performance, but also potentially injury. So they will collect that data and they will prescribe athletes accordingly. So then athletes they come into the season more well prepared and they have potentially better outcomes. They are able to stay healthier. I'm not saying every athlete is going to be healthy in season in basketball. It's really grueling, but they do a great job at microdosing things in the weight room. They don't overload them in practice. NBA coaches aren't really college coaches where it's like you have a bad night and then they're on the line running the next morning, 20 suicides or whatever. I don't know if I can say that word on YouTube. 20 ladders or whatever. So to answer your question, how can one play without so much overloading? They do deal with a lot of tendon issues, but also keep in mind the sport self-selects for athletes who are resilient, who can stay healthy, and they just have a lot of modalities. They have red light therapy and those hydrogen tanks, and they have a lot of things that can speed along your recovery that most people don't have access to. And they just manage the load really well because they have a lot of data. How much can a person increase their max velocity? Quite a bit, actually. You can't turn a zebra into a cheetah, but you can make a faster zebra that might beat the slowest cheetah. There's stories. My favorite example is Kalen Walker, the sprinter from Iowa. I don't know if he's still at Iowa or not, but he went from 11.1, I think, as a freshman or a senior in high school, and then he dropped it all the way to 9.98 or something, an entire second off his 100, which is a huge increase. And now he's probably one of the best sprinters, at least short sprinters in the country. So if you're sprinting consistently two or three times a week, you will increase your max velocity. How much does weight correlate to vert in mathematical terms? Extra weight equals vert loss. Fat don't fly. If you get fat, you are going to lose vert, and even to some extent, if you take a bunch of roids and get a jacked upper body, that can have some small negative effects on your vert, but especially fat. There was that video I posted with Isaiah Espinosa, and he put on 20 pounds in a weight vest, and his vert decreased by like 10 inches. So it can have a huge effect on your vert. What can I do to be athletic overall, not just vertical? Training is relatively the same. The specificity comes with what you want to get better at. If you want to get better at practice agility, if you want to get better at speed, practice at speed. If you want to get better at your vert, obviously practice your vert. And a lot of the times playing your sport concurrently with training is going to make you more athletic. If you're doing speed work, if you're doing jump sessions and you're getting stronger, more powerful in the weight room, and you're not inducing a ton of fatigue and you're able to practice your sport at a pretty high level, you're going to get a lot more athletic. Everything else is just kind of filling in between. One of my favorite stories for this is with myself. And I got a lot more athletic after my senior year of college. I was doing sprint work. I was getting way stronger in the weight room. My vertical increased by 3 to 4 inches in a year. And even though I wasn't, because I played college basketball, so even though I wasn't playing basketball 5 or 6 days a week was before, I was playing maybe once a week. My agility increased a lot just by playing once per week and then just getting stronger, getting more powerful, doing speed work and jumping. And all of a sudden I was able to go out and actually contain guards, which I was not able to do in college. And that's not even from playing basketball and working on agility. So the transfer, triple extension is triple extension, like we say. So getting better at that is going to make you better at a lot of things. What's the ideal jump volume depending on training level, 1 foot versus 2 foot, moment of the season? That's going to be highly dependent. A lot of it depends on your age and your outputs. So if you're young, you can tolerate more jump volume because you just have less mileage. You're a brand new car. And if you don't jump very high, you can tolerate a lot of jump volume. Typically, we say you want to take 100 jumps a week, at least, probably even more. But 100 jumps a week, max approach jumps a week when you're young. Age 12 plus, probably more like 200, but to be safe, 100. And then past the age of 20, 21, maybe now you can only do 50 jumps a week, and that's in the span of just one jump session, or maybe split into 2 jump sessions. And then in your mid-20s, maybe you're only getting 25, but you're also jumping higher and higher and higher because the higher your outputs are, the more force you're putting through your body. So it's highly dependent, and you're going to probably figure it out pretty soon. I can tolerate this amount of jumps before I get hurt, and you'll be able to auto-regulate it over time. What are the differences that dictate if you're a 1 or 2 foot jumper? A lot of it's just what you do in your youth. So I did mostly 2 foot jumping when I was younger. But some guys do a lot of 1 foot jumping when they were younger, and that kind of dictates what you're more comfortable with. Usually people are a little bit more natural 1 foot jumpers just because it's a lot easier technique to learn, but it's also a lot more forceful. So switching over to 2 foot isn't a bad idea because the weight room transfers way better to 2 foot jumping. 2, it's usually better for most team sports, like basketball, for example, is being able to finish off of 2 feet is really important. And 3, I think I mentioned before, it's easy, it's less stressful because you're spreading the stress over 2 legs instead of 1 leg. So you can usually jump for longer. You can keep being a 2 foot jumper into your 40s and dunking and into your 50s and stuff like that. Are extreme ISOs underrated or overrated? I don't know what you mean by extreme ISOs. I think you probably mean overcoming ISOs. I don't think it's underrated or overrated. I think they're right where they need to be. I think clinicians and practitioners know that they're very good for increasing tendon stiffness. They're very good for increasing neural drive. They're very efficient in terms of you can get an entire ISO session done in 10 or 15 minutes. So they're a really good option to use in season as long as they don't mess up some athletes like PFP, which is what we've done with them. So I think they're a very great tool. I know sprinters use them a lot because they don't really induce a ton of fatigue, so they can still get that high neurological stimulus, maybe build a little extra muscle, still increase their tendon stiffness, but they can also sprint at a high level. And of course, it's a KPI. A lot of the sprint research, I don't know if it's official research or if it's just data that coaches have collected over the years, but there's a lot of Natera's sprint ISO, specific ISOs. There's a lot of normative data of, hey, elite sprinters are here for their single leg thrust and non-elite sprinters are here. So there's also that data piece that I find pretty interesting. I have IT band syndrome for several months now, what to do and how long it might take. A lot of IT band syndrome, it depends if it's distal or proximal, but usually looking at your hips first, just doing any general hip circuit, both stretching and strengthening. I have a few posted, I think, on my YouTube that are good examples of that. That will take care of a lot of your issues. A lot of the IT band syndrome stems from just the tissues underneath the IT band being a little bit tight, a little bit restricted, so unlocking some range of motion there. And then part of it is strengthening some of the tissues, for instance, like your glute med. If your TFL is a little bit overactive and really tugging on that IT band, so it'll distribute the tension within the IT band when your muscles are contracting a little bit even or a little bit more even. If those tissues are a little bit stronger, just stuff like that. And it's also sometimes a mechanics issue. Sometimes guys get overly everted when they are running, or their hips are dropping when they're running, and then that puts a lot of tension on the IT band because the hips crashing into the IT band, and that can either present with symptoms distally or proximally. How do you know if you have stiff or compliant tendons? Well, usually about how high you jump. You can tell it's not a great test, but it's an okay test of, like, if you do a CMJ and then you hop into a CMJ, if you can get significantly higher off of a hop versus off of a CMJ, you have stiffer-ish tendons. But I don't really want to say too much about that because it's really hard to know for sure unless you're evaluated in a lab. But if you jump high, you have stiff tendons. If you don't jump high, you probably don't, unless you're a weightlifter who probably has really stiff tendons, but they just don't have the coordination and the rate of force development to be able to actually stretch their stiff tendons. So that's kind of the far end of the spectrum. But for the most part, if you jump high, you have stiff tendons. If you don't, then they're probably pretty compliant. And also, like, if your muscle itself is weak, your tendons are probably also pretty weak. How do I go from a 5,000 to 7,000 watts on CMJ? I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, 13% body fat, 350 max parallel squat. So CMJ KPIs, squat, obviously, probably even front squat more than back squat, and getting your power clean up, of course. I would say underrated also is just practicing your CMJ. People just don't practice their CMJs very much at all. They might do 3 reps of it at the beginning of the workout for a readiness test, but a lot of guys just don't practice your CMJ. So I would say you need to practice your CMJ consistently. Treat it like a jump session. You get 20 reps in, and you'll probably see your outputs climb up over time. And it's something you can do more reps of. So you can probably do 20 reps 3 times a week. And 50 plus reps a week, you'll probably see your numbers climb up over time. And then third would be increase your eccentric metrics. Reason being, if you have a bimodal CMJ curve, your concentric peak is almost never going to be higher than your eccentric peak. Because an ideal CMJ looks like one big peak, and then it'll dip down, and then you'll have another peak, and then it'll come there. And the second peak is your concentric peak, but a lot of the concentric peak is dictated by your eccentric peak. So if you increase your eccentric capacities, the rate of force development, like things like your braking impulse or braking power, more than likely you'll have more energy stored in the system to jump higher, and your concentric metrics will end up going up. Looks like I am out of time. So sorry I didn't get to the rest of your questions, but I will see you guys next week.